I was trained in osteopathy and chiropractic and naturopathy. So we were treating a lot of the fascial issues, muscles, joints, and et cetera. And I would find that the problems just kept coming back, all right? So this is why, as I evolved my thinking, I thought there had to be a more underlying reason why muscles kept getting tight, why people had to stretch all the time, why it seemed like it was constantly under strain. And this concept of the fascial envelope is something I think may be useful. If you look at the skeletal framework, which is this dense bone structure, which is subject to injury, impact injury, and then you add the fluid-filled organs, which are also subject to injury, if you consider the fact that this whole structure can alter its shape because of injury, it can actually expand, essentially expands, then you realize that the fascial envelope, which is represented by this big oval, all of these muscles, joints, and fascia are going to be, the energy is going to be transferred to them. So when you see tension in the fascia or the joints or the muscles, in fact, in many cases where it's due to these deeper injuries. Let's say this represents a piece of bone. That fascia will have a certain degree of tone around it, which may be supple. But if you change the shape of the structure, basically my contention is that the whole thing expands. Now you're actually altering the amount of stretch on the tissues around it. And in fact, a lot of what we see is this ropiness of the muscles and fascia, when we correct the deeper structure, instantly resolves. So I have one of our therapists who does myofascial therapy. When we started showing her these things, the things that she would test and look for, these ropey areas that she would normally treat, we treat the heart or the femur or whatever. She goes back, she goes, oh my God, it's gone. Like she had to, and that's of course why she decided to do matrix repatterning, is why she realizes this is an important intervention. Not to say that other therapies are not useful. I'm just saying if you don't correct the deeper structures, they will tend to come back. The idea of one part of the body affecting the other is very important, because if you take a structure that's restricted, they're represented by this pull on the fascia. This pajama lady here represents that. This represents a primary restriction. As this person, you can't see the lines very easily here, but there's lines of force going up into the shoulder, across to the knees. You're altering the mechanics of the entire body. And as a result, you get alteration in joint mechanics, you get irritation, you get strain and pain, often not in the site of the primary problem, which in fact was sore probably when you first injured it, but now it is constant information. Now the brain adapts to constant, all right? You put on your clothes in the morning, within 30 seconds you don't even notice you have them on, you're not really aware of it. Your brain is adapted to a fairly constant base of information because it no longer considers it threatening. A change is considered more threatening. So if I had a restriction here and then I go to move my shoulder here, that's an intermittent stimulation, which my brain goes, there's something changing here, it's irritating. I'm going to alert you to that piece of information because that is potentially threatening and you need to know that, all right? Whereas if it's constant, it's not really going to be there. It's not going to be as obvious to your conscious awareness, all right? That's important because many of us, when we look at someone who's in pain, whether it's back pain or shoulder pain or neck pain, are often focused on the area of pain. And with matrix repatterning, we're really looking at finding the primary restrictions which affect those intermittent changes. And sometimes there is pain in the area of primary, but often there isn't, and you can't rely on that. So you can use something fairly objective to determine these primary restrictions that will allow you to find how to correct those, plus release and normalize the entire fascial system, which removes the other painful sources of irritation. And you can actually demonstrate this to a patient. For example, you might notice, for example, Chris, that you've occasionally had discomfort in certain ranges of motion with your shoulder. And you thought your problem might have been in your shoulder. When in fact, you can easily demonstrate this to a patient by having an area that's primary temporarily corrected, have them move their shoulder. Oh, it feels much better. And then you correct it permanently, and they notice that that symptom is improved. So you don't rely on symptoms, in other words. I mean, that is endless. Finding out where the primary is a little bit of detective work. You know, when you analyze someone and you say, well, I think this and this happens, well, sort of, you know. There are many factors affecting health, all right? We talked about stress, genetic influences, nutritional factors, toxicity, pollutants, allergens, and injury. All of these affect our ability to adapt. The body is amazingly resourceful at being able to adapt to many factors, okay? We're dealing with one aspect of that in terms of mechanical injury, okay? But what seems to be important here, if you extrapolate back, is if this injury is present, okay, what other effects does it have? Everything affects everything. So your ability to process through organs that may now be impaired. For example, we've seen several cases now where people on cholesterol-lowering medication, when their liver is treated, their cholesterol plummets. I'm talking about significant reduction. So now to the point where I warn people and I suggest they get back to their physician to have their cholesterol monitored, because in my opinion, low cholesterol is a significant health risk as well. But also your ability to digest and assimilate organs like the pancreas, which are not only exocrine, they're endocrine, right? Exocrine producing digestive enzymes, the stomach being a primary. All of these things affect your ability to digest food. It's important. Potentiating genetic issues like the people with ankylosing spondylitis were born with the gene, but many go through life. I treated someone whose whole family of ankylosing spondylitis, but he hadn't developed much of the symptoms until recently. He had an injury, right? And he's in his 60s, right? So he didn't have the expression of that gene until something else happened, right? Which was this, all right? And plus it is a source of pain. So pain, physiologic imbalance, biochemical imbalance, all can add to stress, which can create a vicious cycle as well. So we're affecting things, even though we're intervening in one area, we may be affecting many other factors. When things are working beautifully, the body is incredibly just a work of art, as you see. This is from the Body Worlds exhibit, and we were noting all of the asymmetries in the bone, which we'll actually be observing, and it's incredible. So I point out to people as they walk by, I know why this person died. It's right here. Yeah. I could have fixed them. As a matter of fact, there's a certain point you have to sort of say, okay, I can't do much more for that individual. The body is a beautiful thing when everything is working in harmony. Life itself is an expression of beauty and balance. Pain is often a reaction to something else. So the correction of the cause is our goal. Now, it's often in these deep core issues. We talked about the bones and the organs, all right? So these are areas that many clinicians have not been looking at, or how do we look at them in the first place, right? This is really addressing it at the cellular molecular level, which in a sense, in my opinion, is every therapy that we're using is affecting the system. This is the way the body looks. This is it, all right? We know this is what we're dealing with, so how can we best address that? Okay, that's been my challenge in looking at this concept called matrix repatterning. So we're looking at well-being, not disease. We're looking at supporting normal function, optimal function. It's inherent in the body. That normal state is there. So we're focusing on solutions, not treatments. We don't want to be treating people. We want to help them get on with their lives, okay? And that's the goal of this therapy. That's been my ultimate goal. And it's a constant learning process, you know. There's this medicine and that medicine. There's lots of different ways we can do things, this method and that method. And then there's the way the body really is. Well, if we're dealing with something that's as close to the model as we can get, I agree with you, the models are never perfect. This model seems to be fairly congruent with much of the observed evidence, as close as I've ever seen. So I'm open to other suggestions because I know there are many influences that affect us.